Ambres. I call you Cynthia, but I love that whenever someone's a doctor, I have to call you doctor because you own that and deserve it. I want to hear your story because so many women watching that are women of color, we don't see a lot of Dr. Cynthias in our world. So tell me how you became Dr. Cynthia Ambres.
Well, I'll tell you a quick anecdote about what you just said first, because my mother used to always be angry with me because I never introduced myself as a doctor. And she's like, what is with that? You should, and I think, it's an interesting thing. There's always been a little bit something that keeps me from doing that, unless I'm in, obviously, the setting.
You're in the hospital.
Yeah, in the hospital or speaking somewhere where I'm going to be using my title or other people are using my title. I never feel quite comfortable, even still today, saying doctor.
I really get it.
Yeah.
I think it's an issue of women of color, and thank you for saying that, because I think it's good for women to hear that even when we feel like we're enough, we don't always feel like we're enough.
Right. There's a little something nagging at you.
Almost like somebody in your community will think you're
showing off.
Showing off.
Yeah. Who is
and
she?
yet you
Just to say doctor.
So many years in school to earn that title. Well, I honor you, doctor.
Well, thanks so much.
Tell me how that happened.
Well, it's kind of an interesting thing. I think when I was very young, I was always interested in science and math.
Which is also
from a very
unusual,
young
right?
age.
We're not guided that way. Where were you growing up?
Grew up in Queens, New York. My mother and father were from Alabama and Oklahoma, respectively. They basically migrated, I'll say, to New York for a better life so that my mother and father could be together without some harassment, because my mother is half Irish. And they came north to New York to establish a life and raise children. And I'm glad that they did.
Yes, for sure.
But it was always about, for me, my mother told me when I was very young, I'd be in the room where she'd give me these dolls and I'd line the dolls up, and either I was teaching school or I was examining them in some way. But I never played with the dolls outside of that. They stayed in their row, and I'd come in with the blackboard and I would teach them. So she knew right away something wasn't that something was a little unusual about me. I didn't know that, though, and my parents always were very wonderful. I mean, we didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up. I didn't know that. They put every sort of penny and effort into my sister and I being taken care of and being exposed to things. So it was all about exposure. My father had gone to college just for a year and a half and had to stop to make a living. And so when they came north, he said his pledge to himself was that his daughters would go to college and graduate school, hopefully too, and be the first in our families to do that. So that was their effort, to just expose us. And by the time I was 12, I had tried to, ice skating, horseback riding, skiing. I mean, I thought we were, really wealthy or something, and we were very low income. But my parents decided that
that's where they were going to put their money.
That's where they were going to put their money.
Well, and let's talk about that, because I think a lot of people of color, and people don't realize this, bet on their children.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
I mean, Latinos, we do the same thing. If there's one kid in the family that's academic, I went to private school. My brother went to public school. He wasn't tracked that way, even within the family, and they bet on the children.
Yeah.
And I think that's why people don't realize we have very circuitous lives.
We do.
Right?
We do.
Because there's a lot given, but there's a lot expected.
A lot expected. Although I have to say, my parents were always very good about not trying to track me into one way or another, but I used to make a joke. I'd say, well, my choices were, and the choices weren't the same as they are these days. So it's, sort of doctor, lawyer, Indian chief, and I couldn't be an Indian chief by default since I wasn't native. So I said, okay, well, I don't want to be a lawyer. That sounds like really boring. So doctors seemed like the right fit from a very young age, but I didn't really know what it meant to be a doctor. So my whole sojourn, if you will, toward that was about my vision and my image in my own head of what that might be. And for me, it was about helping people. And that was my sort of
And so
driver.
how did you pursue that?
Well, I started out, my parents, I was in a situation where we were in Queens and they were doing busing at the time. So I lived in a black neighborhood, so they were mandated busing, and then it was ending just as my sister had been bused. But what they had this thing for siblings. So if you were a sibling of a child that was bused and they were being bused to another area, you could also be bused. So my parents signed me up for that because they were worried about the local schools after elementary school, and sent me to a junior high school in Forest Hills. And it was, I think, definitely a jumping off point for me because it exposed me to a lot of different kinds of things. My sister had gone there. She was better than me at everything at that time, you know. So it was a little hard for me. I'd come in and the French teacher was like, "Oh, Brenda, your sister, that French that she speaks." And, you know, the choir teacher, "Oh, that Brenda, the voice that she has." So I'm like, okay. I was always sort of striving almost to be her. And then we had divergent paths. She went to a local high school, and I tested into Stuyvesant High School, which is a science and math high school in New York. Still there now, and I still support them because that was life-changing. A lot of kids
It's
that were
interesting
very
because
smart.
I don't think people realize in New York there are these schools,
Yes, public schools.
public schools,
Yes.
that track kids early and find their gifts.
Yes, and there are 3 of them, one in the Bronx, one in Brooklyn, one in Manhattan. People from Queens you could test. It was an interesting thing, you could only test for one of them. You had to choose, and if you didn't make it into the one that you chose, you didn't get into any, and Stuyvesant had the higher scores. My father said to me, try for that, you know, always try for that. And my comment always to him was, why do we have to do everything that is the hardest? Because I felt like he always said, try to do this
Well, now
thing.
you know because people of color have to
Of
do
course.
better than everyone.
And he said, you know, you have to be better. That's what he said. You have to be better. And you know what about that, he said, is that if you're excellent, no one can ever take that from you. So high school was a turning point because we had everyone was going to college from that high school. There was no question about it. And all of the better schools came to those schools to recruit students. So we were sought after, and that changes the playing field a little bit when you start to think, oh, what are the possibilities? And then I got exposed to something called PrEP, which was the Pre-Medical Research and Education Program. A woman and her husband, who was a surgeon, started it to increase the number of diverse candidates into medical school. And she would go and find kids in junior high school and high school and start to encourage them to go to these classes. She had classes at Columbia in the summers. You'd go in the summer and you'd go once a week, and it would be taught by medical students.
Wow.
Yes. And I became ultimately a counselor myself in the program. Went back when I was in college, and in the summer months would tutor these kids and teach these kids who were getting ready to go to college. And I got into several Ivy League schools, several other schools, and I wound up going to Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, which was because of the level of scholarship. You know, I got a very almost full scholarship there. That was important to me because I felt that there was a lot of weight on my parents. And I also knew that I was going to need to work during college. So I wanted to make it as, you know, reasonable as possible.
Looking back at this, do you feel like being around exceptional people, you know, in Spanish we say, dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres, tell me who you hang out with, and I'll tell you who you become?
Yes.
Do you feel like that was a game changer for you?
No question. No question in my
It's like
mind.
acting with someone who's a great actor, you become a better actor.
I mean, the summer before I went to college, I was taking college level courses at Columbia, and I wound up getting into 8 medical schools.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was
And
amazing.
which one did you choose?
I chose Mount Sinai in New York, and we narrowed it down to 3.
Before you got in there, you never questioned, is this really the right field for me?
I didn't, you know, it was interesting. A friend of mine who was my boyfriend at the time in college, I remember him saying to me when we met, he said, well, what are you planning to do after school? I said, well, I'm going to medical school. And he said, you mean you're applying to medical school? And I literally wasn't a sense of some kind of cockiness to me. I was like, no, I'm going to medical school. Like, I didn't think of things, and I had never been, you know, taught to think of things in terms of you're maybe going or you're going to try to do it. It was that you're going to do that thing. You know, you're going to put your mind to it and you're going to do that thing.
And when you get to medical school, at what point do you specialize in what you're going to do?
Well, I thought I wanted to be OBGYN because, you know, my feeling was, you know, women need focus, specialized care. I think that a lot of illnesses that are women specific are not well researched, they're not focused on, and you know, I saw that from a very young age. But something told me I don't want to focus just on women, I want to focus on people, I want to be able to treat men and children. And so when I started focusing that way, I said, I don't think general medicine or an internal medicine focus is what I want. And then I chose emergency medicine because I also realized that there were a lot of people who were completely disenfranchised from healthcare in this country, and they weren't going to ever get to a specialist or even maybe a doctor's office, but that in the emergency department setting, you could help a lot of people who maybe that was going to be their only exposure.
That's a very action-packed field.
It is, it is.
Stressful.
It is. I tend to be, when I'm good in an emergency. I think people would say. If there's a lot of tension, I actually become calmer. So that was something I thought would be good for me. Yeah, it would be good. And then my mentor, he told me that his perspective was that people go into the thing they fear the most. So he said, you're a control person. I think you like to be in control, and you went into something where things are out of control sometimes. You don't know what, sometimes we run out of equipment. We've got to make something, we've got to on the
So
spot.
how many years does it take from the time you go into medical school till you finish?
Well, 4 years of college, 4 more years of medical school, and then residency. So it depends on what you choose. With me, I started out in surgery because I felt like there's a focus, especially where I went to medical school, more on medicine, on internal medicine than surgery. So you have an opportunity to learn a lot about internal medicine, but not very much about surgery, and I wanted to be competent on the surgical side as well. So I actually started in surgery, and I did a year of that, and then I actually had taken a scholarship for medical school with something called the National Health Service, which I would love to see brought back, because what it allowed was people like me, who didn't have any money or means or opportunity from parents and other sources of wealth, to get a leg up going into medical school. We'd come out with literally hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, still happening, of course, today. The National Health Service, that was started by one of the administrations, one of the Democratic administrations, had said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to allow students to, for every year they give for underserved people, they can get a year of their loans forgiven.
What? That's a great idea.
Amazing. It's amazing. So you had to do it at least for 2 years. So I did it for 2 years, and I came out of medical school, but then they said, well, if you want to do surgery, because we're trying to make more internists, you have to stop in the middle of the residency and do the service. So I was like, so how am I going to make this work? So I did 1 year of surgery, and then I realized, I said, you have to go to an underserved area. So a lot of people were going to reservations and doing their work there, and I was in the middle of New York City. I'm like, there's underserved people. I walk by them every day going to the hospital. I think I could stay in New York. So I fashioned my own program, submitted it to the state, and then submitted it to the federal government, and they approved for me to stay in New York and work on the Bowery, taking care of mostly people who were succumbed with alcoholism and were unable to get out of those, like indigent people. And it was one of the most incredible times of my life, because these people, I realized when I went to see these patients, talking about need, there were colleagues of mine that would go, they would never touch them they always had gloves on, and they were working with them even when they were just touching them. And I never did that. I always touched them and examined them, and every now and then they would say to me, you're the first person who's ever actually examined me.
Because people were kind of grossed out.
Yeah,
so they stopped seeing them as humans.
Yeah, they stopped seeing them as humans, and they would just kind of talk to them, kind of try to get a verbal history of what the illness might be and guess at it. And I would examine them and touch them, and they just were so appreciative of that alone. Taught me a lot.
And you didn't get pushback from anybody that you were an African-American woman?
In that setting?
Well, in
general? Oh, well, not in that setting, I did. Patients, sometimes. Yes, patients sometimes. Other senior doctors sometimes. I think for career-wise, it was more the issue of being a woman, at least from my perception of it. I do have a tendency to think of race late. I'm not a person that thinks that, somebody doesn't like me because I'm black. It just doesn't come to my mind very quickly. So when I find that out, it sort of surprises me. But being a woman was very evident, because I was a woman in surgery. When I started out in surgery, there were no women residents. I was the only one at St. Vincent's Hospital in New York at the time that I started.
So in hearing you, I have so many questions, because I don't think we really realize, since we talk about becoming self-made and women having economic empowerment, that when you choose one of these fields, you're basically going in the hole.
Yes.
For hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right.
And that might explain why when I've gone to like Doctors Without Borders as a translator, I found the doctors a little jaded. Like, I didn't think that this is what my life was going to be.
Yes.
Do you find that in going through this process, you have at different times found like what's good and bad about it? Just like I would find what's good and bad about the entertainment industry?
Absolutely. Emergency medicines are a microcosm of the entire healthcare system. So when you're in an emergency department, it's the good, bad, and the ugly. You see everything that works in healthcare and you see everything that doesn't work. That's what propelled me to become more of a leader on the administrative side of healthcare, to move out of just clinical practice, because I knew that I was doing a lot of good. I felt very gratified doing the one-by-one patient care and helping residents to look at patients as people. I think that it was wonderful, but I knew that I didn't have the leverage to change the system from just being a doctor seeing patients and teaching residents. I wanted to move forward and lead and be in a situation where I was running the hospital at the chief medical officer level, running the insurance
So let's
company.
discuss that, because I think it's very important to say that when you're a professional, that it is very hard to become self-made. I mean, and be as much as people think doctors are rich, the truth is most doctors are not rich.
Yeah.
And the truth is that if anything happens to you and you stop practicing, you're broke.
Yes,
After
that's right.
all those years of service.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that came into your mind at all. I know but you really did expand yourself.
No question.
And really kind of macro go above the actual day-to-day practicing of medicine.
Yes. For me, I think the inciting incident really was probably more that I could do more to make healthcare better by doing something different. Ultimately, of course,
But you don't miss it when you leave that?
Well, I did it for 20 years. It's not like a little bit of time, so, and I continued to practice a little because emergency medicine allows that. So that was the good thing about it. I miss teaching. I miss being at the bedside with the residents and making sure that they understand the humanity of the practice of medicine. I think that's what I brought to the bedside. So I miss that. I still speak a lot about that. So that helps, I think. But I do miss the one-on-one interaction with residents and other young doctors and even my staff doctors, because at the end of the day, it's about, kindness and being kind. And if you can do that when people are at their worst, there's nothing better than that. So I do miss that. And it's nothing I do almost is as gratifying as some of that, I have to say.
And I know that in this journey, you really got interested in healthcare in general and what was going on in the country, and you became an expert at it.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Well, I started out, I became actually chairman of my department at Beth Israel. So I was the first woman chairman at Beth Israel, definitely the first black one, but so the first woman was probably the biggest thing for them, for the group of men that were chairman of the other departments. And I went to talk to the chief operating officer one day and I said, I'm thinking about joining a consulting firm. I want to learn what's happening in healthcare, because healthcare is practiced in a very geographic nature in this country. So I was a New York sort of Northeast corridor girl, if you will. I'd gone to DC for some of my training at Georgetown, GW, and so forth. But I didn't know what it was like in the rest of the country. And I thought if I did consulting for a couple of years, I knew in these engagements they send you all over, and I'd have an opportunity to really see it differently. And I did. I was in 27 hospitals in 2.5 years. And I talked to the CEO of my hospital, and he laughed at me. He said, Cynthia, you kill me. He said, most people, when they become chairman, they die at their desk. He said, they're there till the end of their career. They don't go anywhere. You've been chairman for a few years, and now you're ready to try, your next thing. But it was always about, what can I do to make a difference in this? This is not working for a lot of people so much.
So it really made you see the world. Kind of, that's the jaded part.
Yeah.
But the thing that maybe this isn't
Yeah.
right for all of us.
It isn't right for all of us, and there's got to be change, and that was sort of the focus of learning what was going on, because you can't speak to change in the broadest sense. So you start to learn that medicine is different parts of the country, that there are places in the world where it's done as well, maybe better. There's a lot of mythology that, it's just so great here. Everything is so great in healthcare and everyone comes here for their healthcare. And those things are just actually not true.
Not true.
So I'm sort of on a mission now to get the word out on some of this.
So does it sometimes bother you that you have this knowledge, you're going and sharing it, but sometimes things don't change in our lifetime?
Yeah.
So does that keep you up at night?
It does sometimes. That's why I meditate. It does sometimes. I was speaking in Vancouver not very long ago, and the woman who was interviewing me said, "What do you think it's going to take to change it?" And I said, "Nothing short of revolution." And she sort of said, "Whoa." I was like, that's how I feel. We need a big shakeup for healthcare to change to the level that we need it to change for the majority
Either
of people
that or
in this
maybe
country.
some of us have to move to another country. Let me take a little turn for a moment and go back to you. I think of you as self-made, because you are. And I think it's important for our women to see that self-made is different in different careers. Like, it's
Yes.
not just like you go be an entrepreneur and you're self-made. A doctor who is, first of all, doctors have to be self-made.
Yes,
Right? You
to
work
some
for
degree,
yourself.
yes.
And I think a lot of doctors have a problem with that. I don't know
Absolutely.
that. Talk about that. Do they teach you at all in medical school the entrepreneurial side of your life?
No. And what's occurred as a result of the fact that we haven't been taught that is now, very few physicians are practicing on their own. They've been, scooped up by large health systems. They have to. They can't make it on their own. They've never been taught how to make it on their own. They don't have the skills. They don't have the understanding, the knowledge. So they've been maybe limping along, but generally it's going to larger and larger practices, and a lot of the hospitals are basically buying patients by bringing doctors into their fold.
It's become like real estate.
It's become like
That's what
real
it sounds
estate.
like.
It's become like real estate. And quite frankly, now that you mention it, if you ask why people are choosing certain places to expand, it is exactly like real estate. So doctors are stuck, and a lot of them are very unhappy because they did go into it to be, to some degree, autonomous. So the first thing out of autonomy that was taken away from us was that, okay, all of a sudden people said, oh, what's evidence-based medicine? Now everything is like, oh, I have to, have these protocols and these algorithms. It used to be, when I was coming along, literally I had a little flip pocketbook that I kept in my pocket that was handed down to me by my surgical chief resident as to what we needed to do, and then we tried different things.
Yeah,
Now,
it's like very,
it's,
a lot of paperwork.
Yes, a lot of paperwork, a lot of algorithms, a lot of things you have to look up. Medicine has become so complicated. There are too many drugs almost to treat the same kind of illness, that people can't navigate all of that without their computer. So things have changed substantially, and in ways that most doctors are not happy with. You don't talk to too many doctors that think the level of change and the way that it went is a good thing for them.
And yet, nursing, for instance, is the hottest business, especially for bilingual and multicultural people.
It absolutely
there's
is,
not enough.
because there are not enough.
And now we just heard that NYU is giving free education to doctors because they're looking for people of color.
Yeah.
So to be an ethnic person and be in medicine is a hot ticket because there's so few of us.
That's true.
Yet
That's true.
you're saying there's all these barriers.
There are a lot of barriers still because it's really about what happens after medical school, when you get into practice, and who helps you then. So it's, the getting to the mark, the jumping through the hoops, as I used to say. My life was very planned out once I got into college and the medical school and residency. It was like I had to jump through hoops, but I always said the hoops were lined, It's like, okay, but there the hoops are. You just have to, and then all of a sudden it was like the hoops start
And
to
it's
move.
a huge obstacle course.
Yes, it's a huge obstacle course, and you have to make choices for yourself.
It sounds to me from what you're saying that you do have to have an entrepreneurial mindset
Yes.
to figure out the path.
Yes.
And you're not trained for that.
No, an entrepreneurial spirit is what I call it, an entrepreneurial spirit where that for yourself there's certain things you want to do. One, you came hopefully into medicine to help people and to practice and to give good care. But you also want to make a living for yourself. You want to take care of your family and
You
your
want to pay
extended
back your
family.
debt,
Many
yeah.
of us, of course, people of color have extended families. It's not just our kids and our husband or whatever, and our wife or whatever it is. We don't, it's bigger than that. There's a site called Doximity, which is where it's like a Facebook for doctors. And one of the guys is called the Wealthy Doctor or something like that. He does a little webinar thing. And he said, the average physician doesn't even have $500,000 in savings when they get ready to retire. Now, when you think about that, like people say, oh, $500,000 sounds like a lot of money. But, for retirement, for someone who's lived their whole life and worked every day, those people can't retire on that money and live anywhere near the lifestyle of when they worked. So we're seeing a lot of doctors working older and older. nurses working older. Now, many of them are in hospital systems, so they've had some sort of required savings. That's been helpful to them. But we're going to have a lot of people that are going to be in a situation after having practiced medicine and helped people their whole lives who are not able to retire at a decent age.
So that's very scary because it sounds like we need to go and teach entrepreneurship.
Yes, yes.
I mean, I think this idea that we all know that you're not going to make it to old age if you don't make money while you sleep, so you have to invest. But with what time and brain power and knowledge are you going to go off and start a whole other... That's unlike every other field.
Yes.
You don't really have time for a side hustle.
No, it's not a lot of time for it. You've got to, count on other people to help you, get a team around you. For me, and I was late to the party about looking at really saving and looking at investing. And I was very lucky. I had a godson. He's a young lawyer. And when he came out of school, he took a few years before he started practicing law, and he worked for E-Trade. So he called me up one day and he said, I had lent him some money for his law school education. And he said, I want to pay you back, but this is what I'd like to do with the money. If this is okay with you, I'd like to invest it for you. And I thought about it and I said, that's, I guess, I didn't need the cash at the moment in time. I was like, that sounds kind of interesting because I don't know anything about it. And he said, I'm going to start teaching you a little bit.
Wow, what a gift.
What a gift. And then he showed me how to kind of watch it and, taught me about options. And, so over the years, that money, of course, has been, extrapolated at 149% return on it from him just putting that little bit of money. And I started to learn, okay, well, I could do that too. And then as I got away from the daily grind of practice, which is exactly what you were saying, it's very hard when you're seeing patients for 10, 12-hour days to then go and try and do something else. But for me, especially now where I'm doing more consulting, I'm on the phone, I'm working a little bit from home, I can spend some time. I go online and I have my own E-Trade account and I start trading, and I have, of course, someone investing the bulk of my money. I'm not doing myself because I don't trust myself to be knowledgeable enough, but I'm knowledgeable also enough to watch what other people are doing with my money as well.
Okay, I'm going to take another little detour again. I can't go into everything we've talked about without talking about as a woman, not to mention a woman of color.
Yes.
How does this career affect your personal life?
I would say, there is a sense that you have had to hunker down kind of on one aspect of your life. I feel like I sort of missed my 20s. I went to college, I was 15. I went to medical school when I was 19. So for me, my 20s were like a wash. I mean, to some degree, I don't mean that, and I learned a tremendous amount and, helped a lot of people, all those wonderful things, but it wasn't like an enjoy, I wasn't like, having, the partying and all these things that people talk about.
No, and I always think women like us, I just went to my son's fraternity and it was like, I landed on the moon. I was like, I think that's why I got sick. But I realized I didn't live through that.
Yeah.
So,
and then we're the caretakers too. We're taking care of everyone.
So part of that too is also you're regressed in some ways. Like you're super old in career years. It's almost super. Yeah. My son goes, Mom, I realize you're very naive. Yeah. And I go, but he was right. Yeah. Because I haven't lived many things in life when you've accelerated these other parts.
Absolutely.
So how does that affect our lives later?
Well, I think it gives you, new perspectives and insights as to what you may want to do as life is changing and you're getting older. So for me, I'm always doing sort of the outside work, making my career happen, being a good doctor, trying to get other people to understand more about what medicine really could be in this country. And then that was that chapter. And so now I have a chapter to speak to people more about self-care and wellness. How do you stay out of the hospital? How do you keep yourself away from the morass of medical bills and medications, as you get older? So my focus has shifted. With that, though, I had to shift into my own self-care. That's right. Something that I had been neglecting for many years of my life. I was always relatively athletic. That helped me. But I would say, the inner work that needed to be done, the feeling that maybe you're not enough, getting out of that focus and onto a focus of, no, I am enough. This is who I am, and I have a light to bring to the world, and this is how I'm going to bring it. That's just happening for me now. And everything in its time, I guess I always say to myself, but I do feel, wow, what would this have been like if I had been thinking about some of these things and developing some of these things?
And let's talk about relationships, because I think you can't have it all at once.
No.
And so those of us that have had these careers, like people always say to me, you act like you've got it all. We failed a lot to get to some
Absolutely.
success.
I've been married twice, and I think that the effort and the awareness and the intention that you have to bring to relationships is not there when you're focused on your career, and especially a career like medicine, because you are constantly being sort of sapped. I mean, it's just your energy. At the end of the day, you don't have it for your loved ones, even at home. And that, of course, is a downside. And then just as a woman, the way people sort of treat you, even when you have gained a lot of knowledge in your career and things like that, you're aware, you're reminded, oh, but that's a woman speaking. I've had, even in my consulting career, one of the very large companies I was working with in New York, we went to a hospital. I was going to be the lead consultant on the engagement to help them improve their processes and their financial situation. And the CEO came over and talked to the other partner and said, you know what, can we get a white guy with white hair, and Cynthia can tell him her ideas, but we would like for there to be like a they actually requested this, for a front person to talk to the doctors and the people at the hospital. And, we were shocked, because in any other kind of circumstance, this wouldn't have been a legal thing, but in consulting, you can do that. And so the lead partner looked at him and said, no, Cynthia is the best we have, and that's why you like her ideas. And she'll lead the engagement, or we won't be doing an engagement here. I don't know what that would have been like at another company with a different person, as a lead partner there. But that wasn't the only time things like that happen, where people will sort of speak over you, or you'll be in a group of chairmen. And so we would talk about ideas, and then someone else would represent my idea, and they'd say, oh, Bob, that was a good idea.
Yeah, and I get
those kinds of things all the time.
I want to know, you are clearly, a woman of substance and a wise woman. What would you say to young women out there, knowing everything you know now? First of all, about money, and about self-reliance, self-made, if you will. What is the importance of that?
So important.
No matter what career or no matter what you do, that you would advise?
Start saving early. Start putting money away. No matter how small your paycheck is, start putting money away. It adds up. One of my closest friends, she's an ear, nose, and throat surgeon, amazing woman. She was a nurse, decided she wanted to be a doctor. And she told me early on, she says, I have this thing with American Express. They take money out of my account every month. And I was listening to her, I was like, oh, that's nice. I didn't do it. She started doing that in 1987, 88, something like that. Was able to buy her first medical building because of that savings. And it wasn't like we had money back then, but she knew what she wanted to do, and she had a vision. So I'd say establish your vision early. Think about it now. It may change. The road is always winding and twisting. A good friend of mine who sails, he says to me, how you have to tack to get across the ocean. You don't go straight. That's what life is. That's what careers are. So don't count on even the final station. It's really about just right now, just along the way. Just a little bit at a time.
But I think young women don't realize that whether you're a doctor or whether you work in a corporation, we all have to think entrepreneurially.
Yes.
Because if we don't have money, we don't know what's going to happen. You think a mate, they could die, you could get divorced.
Yes.
A corporation
Become ill.
could lay you off.
Yeah. Become ill and have large medical bills.
You have to put yourself first.
Yes.
And you would, that's why I wanted to talk to you, because I don't think people think a doctor or a lawyer, or you still have to think more than ever.
Absolutely, more than ever.
Entrepreneurially.
Yes.
And that you work for yourself.
Yes.
And what does that mean?
Yes.
And if you enter that career without that, sooner or later it's not going to go well.
That's exactly right. And that is the problem when you say people are jaded. I know there are a lot of physicians that are working past where they hope to be working. They hope to be able to retire and to enjoy some of their lives, and they postpone so much, right? So they said, oh, I didn't really see my kids grow up, but I'll see my grandchildren grow up. And now they're having a struggle to do that. And they feel like, oh my God, the lack of fairness of it. And everybody feels that way, no matter what industry they're in to some degree. It's like, oh, I'm gonna be 65 or 70 still working. You see if there's a billboard on the 90, it talks about 1 in 3 Americans say that will never be able to retire. That's crazy.
It's crazy. I want to finish with one other thing. I know you believe a lot, going back to self-care. If we don't take care of ourselves, that's the other issue. Your health isn't good, so what did I
nothing
make
else
the money?
matters.
Where am I going to spend it? You believe in a holistic approach to medicine.
I do.
And so what advice do you give all of us? How are we going to make it? We know we need money to make it to the end. How are we going to make it to the end with good quality of life?
Yes, yes. Well, there's a saying, it's not that people are afraid of dying, they're afraid of how they're going to die, right? And so I like to turn that around and say, let's not be afraid of how we're going to live. So let's just focus on living. Focus on the things that make you happy each day, a little something that is a good thing that you do for yourself. That's just a joy, so you can bring joy. I always think about success in terms of, Fred Rogers from Mr. Rogers.
I love that movie.
It's his thing was, how do you live a successful life? Number 1, be kind. Number 2, be kind. And number 3, be kind. And so if you can spread that every day a little bit, the joy that brings you back when you've been kind to another person and they have the feeling of that is an amazing thing. It makes you healthier. It's my answer to heart health in its truest sense.
And I know, because you and I've talked about it, this introspection, constantly taking measure of where you are in your life.
Yes.
And how can you do better? And has what's gotten us here still working for us?
Yes, exactly. And with long relationships, people always talk about relationships and the divorce rate's so high and all these things. And people talk about making it work and it shouldn't be that hard. But it really is like all the other aspects of our lives. We're always trying to make things work. We're trying to make our work work. We're trying to make our relationships work. It's about knowing who you are and what you're willing to give and get. So if your relationship is something that's important to you, find out what the other person wants, find out what you want, talk about it, find that space. Find out even if it's not reconcilable, find that out. Take the time to discover that. And then you can move forward with the relationship or not. But it's, going inside and really finding out what's important to you. You have to be well to help other people be well.
Can't be a wounded healer.
No.
Dr. Ambres, and I love saying that. I'm so proud of your journey and thank you so much. And I just think you're fabulous.
Thank you. I think you're fabulous too, as you know. I am Dr. Cynthia Ambres, and I am self-made.